The desert wind scraped across Camp Granite like a memory it refused to forget. At dawn, the recruits stood trembling in formation, their uniforms soaked with sweat not from exertion, but dread. The Nevada flats stretched for miles, pale, dry, endless. No trees. No cover. Just heat and silence. And then, the sound of boots, slow, deliberate, echoed down the gravel path. She arrived like an apparition from another war. Staff Sergeant Reilly Morgan. Her limp was pronounced, not exaggerated. Just real. Her left foot dragged half a beat behind her right, the boot sole worn uneven. Her face, half-shadowed beneath the brim of her cover, bore the unmistakable ripple of burned scars, from temple to jawline, pale as desert bone. Her right arm was sleeved in old shrapnel and black ink, names, numbers, a few still legible. She did not explain them. She never had. She simply walked. The line of recruits shifted, some stiffened, others glanced sideways. One of them smirked. Private Sean Cutter leaned and muttered just loud enough for those near him to hear. Frankenstein's ghost showed up early. No one laughed. Not aloud. But the silence shifted, the way silence always does when cowardice hides behind humor. Morgan passed them. Her eyes scanned the row, slow, unwavering. She heard him. Everyone knew she had. She didn't stop. At the front, she turned. Faced them. Her stance was off, weight tilted to one side, but her gaze was level. Like glass. Like distance. Eyes forward, barked Lieutenant Brody, the base training officer. You're under Staff Sergeant Morgan for the remainder of Phase 2. No medals read. No service record. No mention of wars. Just her name. Her presence. And a silence that said, watch closely. She launched them into drills without warning. 50-pound packs. Full-field sprints. Mock casualty drags across gravel hot enough to blister palms through gloves. She didn't shout. She didn't curse. When a recruit tripped and tore his knee open, she hauled him upright with one arm and growled, "You'll bleed later." By noon, dust coated their lungs. Salt stung their eyes. Some recruits faltered. One vomited behind a dune. Morgan never broke stride. Her limp didn't slow her. Her voice never rose. At lunch, Cutter sat beneath the shade of the mess tent, boots off, socks steaming. When Morgan passed, he whispered, "Bet she sets off airport alarms just by breathing." Still, she said nothing. She sat alone. Not because she asked to, but because silence is contagious. And shame, even more so. No one joined her. No one approached. That night, after gear checks and blister inspections, Morgan walked the perimeter alone. Her limp steady. Her breath slow. The desert wind pulled dust across her boots. In the bunkhouse, Cutter laughed louder than he needed to. Morgan didn't turn. Didn't flinch. She'd been through worse. Much worse. None of them knew. Not really. Not the boy with the trembling hands. Not the woman who triple-knotted her laces each morning like they were a talisman. And not Cutter, who mocked because it was easier than understanding. None of them knew what happened in Helmand. It was 8 years ago. Morgan had been leading a convoy sweep west of Sanjin. A simple resupply mission, the kind you did with one eye half shut. The dirt road was narrow, flanked by poppy fields and old Russian mines. Kids waved at them as they passed. The first blast came from beneath a rusted-out motorbike parked by a stone wall. It split the air and the convoy. The lead vehicle lifted, disintegrated, flame washing over the road. Morgan was in the second Humvee. She remembered the heat first. Then the sound, like being trapped inside a drum full of broken glass. The vehicle veered. Her driver was already gone, face open and red. The gunner screamed. Her own door caved in, then gave. When she came to, she was 20 feet from the road, in a ditch of irrigation mud and diesel. Her left arm was smoking. Shards of dashboard had embedded in her shoulder. She couldn't see out of her right eye. And still, she went back. Not because it made sense. Not because someone told her to. But because it was what you did. She crawled. Through fire, through twisted metal, through screams. The first body she pulled was a medic. Half his ribs were exposed, but he was breathing. The second was the gunner, face burned, barely conscious. She dragged him by the collar, one boot scraping behind her. She didn't stop. The third was already silent. She pulled him anyway. Then the second IED went off. It didn't hit them directly. But the shockwave knocked her flat again. She stayed down that time. Her vision blurred. Blood pooled in the gravel beside her cheek. The medevac report later said she died en route. Twice. But she didn't stay dead. 3 months in burn units. 4 in physical therapy. Nerve damage, partial blindness in one eye, hearing loss in her left ear. She refused a medical discharge. Denied full pension. She asked to be reassigned. Put me where I can still stop mistakes, she told them. Before they become funerals. They sent her to Camp Granite. And now Cutter said she just wanted pity. He said it during latrine cleanup, when Lewis asked him to give it a rest. She just wants to be treated special, Cutter said. Carries her scars like a badge. Lewis didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, she saved 3 men from a blown convoy. Crawled through fire to do it. One of them was my dad. Cutter paused. You're lying. No, Lewis adjusted the strap on his pack. He told me once. Said a woman pulled him out by the collar. Said she walked through hell. Cutter's mouth twitched, but the words didn't come as easily this time. During that afternoon's combat simulation, Cutter's joke stopped altogether. It was a full-force field exercise, ambush conditions, simulated gunfire, smoke rounds, flashbangs. The kind of drill that separated instinct from bravado. Halfway through the course, an explosion echoed from a hidden speaker. White smoke blanketed the field. Cutter froze. Disoriented. Blinded. His squad scattered. Voices yelled over radios. Instructions blurred. He crouched near a low embankment, trying to recall the protocol. His fingers twitched on his weapon. Sweat poured down his neck. Then a hand grabbed his vest. He spun, panicked, only to see Morgan's face 2 inches from his. Move, she said. Calm. Sharp. She yanked him from his crouch, turned, and pushed him toward cover. They made it to the rally point 5 minutes later. Cutter didn't say a word. That night, the barracks were silent. No laughter. No comments. Cutter lay on his bunk staring at the slats above. He didn't sleep. Next morning, Lieutenant Brody summoned him. Colonel Hayes wants a word. Cutter stood at attention outside the office, then stepped in. Hayes was behind his desk, watching something on a monitor. He didn't look up immediately. Sit. Cutter sat. The screen showed old combat footage, grainy, dusty. A camera mounted on a helmet. Screams in the background. A woman's voice gave orders. Calm. Relentless. Fire blazed on the edge of the frame. She's the one dragging bodies, Hayes said, voice quiet. Cutter leaned forward. On the screen, a soldier, unscarred, her face still whole, hauled a limp Marine over a collapsed wall. That's Morgan, Hayes continued. Helmand Province. The day her convoy was hit. Cutter swallowed. She was awarded the Silver Star. Declined the ceremony. Asked to return to the field. Hayes finally looked at him. She didn't come here for pity. She came to make sure people like you come home. Cutter nodded once. Nothing else. He left the office wordless. Found Morgan by the range. I saw it, he said. She looked at him, still. I'm sorry. She didn't blink. Didn't soften. Then be better, she said. And walked away. By the time the final week arrived, something had shifted in Private Sean Cutter. He no longer mocked. He no longer lounged at the edge of drills or muttered beneath his breath. He moved with intent. Checked his gear twice, sometimes 3 times. When other recruits stumbled, he didn't gloat, he doubled back. Pulled packs over shoulders. Gave quiet instructions. He didn't apologize again. Not with words. But with action. The rest noticed. Private Lewis didn't say much, but nodded once, silently, on the 6th day of evaluation week. Cutter nodded back. During one of the last 10-mile stress drills, the kind that left blisters inside boots and grit between teeth, the recruits slogged through the ridge pass north of Granite. The wind bit harder that day. The terrain pitched just enough to steal breath from the lungs. Morgan ran the route with them. Her limp more pronounced now. She never complained. Cutter stayed close to the rear, watching the younger ones, the ones too proud to admit the heat was catching up. He paced a girl named Palmer when she stumbled at the halfway mark, didn't leave her side till she was stable again. He never looked for Morgan. Never tried to be seen. But she saw. She saw when he offered his last canteen fill to the kid who tore his water bladder. She saw when he took the front line during night patrol and corrected the bearing without raising his voice. She saw him turn, grow, steady. She didn't comment. She never did. And Cutter never expected her to. It was in that final week, during one of the more complex urban simulations, that Cutter made the call. A fire drill scenario. 2-story mock building. Hostile presence unknown. Recruits were to clear the space, recover a wounded casualty, and exfil with full coordination. Cutter led the team. Inside, the smoke machine had flooded the stairwell. Visibility near zero. The casualty was placed in a hidden room behind a broken doorway. His team panicked. One recruit lost radio contact. Another's weapon jammed. Cutter took stock in 2 breaths. Adjusted. You two sweep the flank, he told Lewis and the recruit nearest him. Palmer, cover the stair. I'll go for the casualty. No theatrics. No barking. Just clear, simple leadership. They moved. The evac was completed under the time limit. No errors. Morgan stood outside the drill zone when they emerged, covered in soot and chalk. She said nothing. She just held out a clipboard and marked the time. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Brody pulled Cutter aside. Colonel Hayes wants you squad lead for graduation day. Cutter stared at him. Me? Brody didn't explain. Just handed over the final protocol and walked off. The morning of graduation came colder than expected. Wind off the flats carried dust like old breath. Recruits stood in dress uniforms, lines sharp, faces clean. Some held back smiles. Others blinked hard at the horizon, unsure what to do with the weight of completion. Colonel Hayes took the podium under the base flagpole, flanked by instructors and visiting officers. His voice cut through the wind, low and certain. This cycle's been unlike the rest. A pause. Some of you were pushed harder than you expected. Some of you failed and were pulled back up. Some of you learned that strength isn't always about being the loudest in the room. He looked directly at Morgan. And some of you were lucky enough to train under Staff Sergeant Morgan. There was a stillness that came down over the crowd. She doesn't speak often. But let me tell you who she is. Hayes stepped back slightly, gestured toward a large monitor nearby, footage flickered to life. The convoy. The fire. Morgan, years younger, hauling bodies. No one asked her to go back. But she did. Through flame. Through noise. Through death. The screen faded. When the medics asked her what she wanted after surviving all that, she said, "Send me where I can still help." Hayes turned to the recruits. "You trained under Reilly Morgan. But some of us remember her by another name." He stepped aside. "Phoenix." The crowd murmured. Hayes nodded at Cutter. Cutter stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. He stood at attention, faced Morgan where she stood in the corner of the platform, head high, uniform neat, boots dusty from morning rounds. He saluted. "Thank you for breaking me," he said. Morgan returned the salute, slow, precise. "You rebuilt yourself." And that was it. No ceremony. No applause. Just silence, and memory. After the final salute, the field began to empty. Chairs folded. Families took photos. Recruits slipped off their covers and grinned for parents. The weight of training gave way to celebration. But on the edge of the field, Morgan remained. She didn't mingle. Didn't accept the few claps on the shoulder offered by instructors. She stood beneath the lowering flag, hands behind her back, watching as the last formation dissolved. Private Adam Lewis approached her slowly. He didn't speak at first. She glanced at him, then away again, habit. He stood beside her, silent, letting the quiet settle between them. After a moment, he held something out. A patch. Faded, frayed, barely legible. Morgan took it in her hand. Rubbed the edge with her thumb. "My father kept this," Lewis said. "Until the day he died." She looked at him again. "Not through him. He said you were the light in his hell." She nodded once, slow. "He died 10 years ago," Lewis continued. "But he talked about that day every year on his birthday. Said Phoenix pulled him out of the fire." Her fingers tightened slightly on the patch. "What was his name?" "Michael Lewis. Alpha 7. Her breath caught. She closed her eyes. She remembered. The night had been wet. Heavy smoke and monsoon rain. It was a medevac call, second run in a bad zone. Command said to wave off. She didn't. A patrol pinned in a river gulch, fire from 3 sides. She came in low, one skid dragging mud. Door gunner already shot. She jumped down herself, rifle in one hand, arm under the nearest soldier. Lewis. He kept screaming not to leave his buddy. Wouldn't let go of the other man's vest. She carried them both. That night, she hadn't slept. Just sat on a cot, hands shaking, uniform soaked through. He had come to see her the next morning. Still bandaged. Voice raw. "You didn't leave me." She hadn't known what to say. Just nodded. And now, his son stood in front of her, eyes the same color. Steady. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know." He gestured toward the patch in her hand. He wore that every day. Sewed it into his jacket when it finally tore loose. He said it was the one thing that reminded him who he was. "And who you were." She looked down at the patch. Infantry wings. The thread barely held. "I remember the screams," she said. "I remember him saying he wouldn't have seen another dawn without you." They stood in silence. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She reached up, gently pinned the patch to the inside lining of her own uniform coat. Just beneath her name. "I'll carry it now," she said. Lewis nodded. He started to step away, then paused. "There's one more thing." She turned. "My dad always said, the fire took part of him. But Phoenix gave the rest of him back." Morgan didn't answer. Just looked out across the field, the wind brushing sand across the footprints. Behind them, the sun was setting. Long shadows reached across the parade grounds. The world kept moving, soft and uncaring. But for a moment, everything held still. Morgan stepped forward. Into the empty field. Toward the place where the recruits had stood hours before. She crouched, ran a hand across the dirt. Buried something there. Not a medal. Not a photo. Just a strip of cloth. The insignia from her last deployment. She stood again, slowly. Turned back to Lewis. "We keep going," she said. He nodded. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." As the last rays fell behind the hills, the base grew quiet. In that quiet, she stood alone, not abandoned, not broken. Simply there. And for the first time in years, she wasn't watching from the edges. She was remembered. Not for the scars. Not for the limp. But for the fire. And the way she carried others through it. Night returned to Camp Granite without ceremony. The wind slipped through chain-link fences, whispered under barracks doors, stirred the dust where fresh footprints had been. Most of the recruits were gone, shipped to their next duty station or on their way home, tight-lipped with pride and relief. The base was quieter now, stripped of the urgency that had filled every hour just days ago. Staff Sergeant Morgan sat alone in the classroom annex. A single desk lamp illuminated a pile of training rosters and performance reports. Her jacket hung behind the chair. Her scarred arm rested on the table, the shrapnel lines catching faint yellow light. She hadn't left with the others. She never did. Retire? She could have. More than once. But something always pulled her back to this place, to the flat light, the dry wind, the fear in new faces. She didn't enjoy it. She didn't seek recognition. But she believed, with a quiet fury, that if she didn't show them what real cost looked like, no one would. She heard the knock before the door opened. Colonel Hayes stepped in. He didn't wear a formal uniform tonight, just a windbreaker, his name stitched above the heart. His hair, more gray than not, was neatly combed, his shoulders square. "Morgan," he said, nodding. She stood. Out of respect. "At ease," he added. "I'm not here to inspect you." She waited. He pulled out a chair, sat across from her. "You've seen the orders, I assume." She nodded once. "They're offering you the liaison role in Quantico." Another nod. "You'll have authority. A team. Oversight on trauma response and return-to-duty evals." Still, she said nothing. Hayes leaned forward. "You'd be the one deciding who's fit to go back into the field. Who's pretending they are. You'd be protecting them from what we both know can't be undone." "I already do that," she said. "Here, yes," he replied. "But this is bigger. And frankly, Morgan, you've earned the right not to have to carry the whole burden in silence." She looked at him, one eye dulled from injury, the other sharp with memory. "Have I?" Hayes didn't answer at first. "Then, what you did for Cutter, he'll carry that with him for the rest of his life. He'll make better choices. He'll keep people alive. Because you didn't shame him. You didn't grandstand. You just showed him what integrity looks like." She looked down at her arm. At the worn patch she had sewn into the lining of her uniform. At the names inked into her skin. "Most days," she said, "I don't feel like I saved anyone." Hayes didn't argue. That silence, the honest kind, settled between them. He stood. "Think about it," he said, reaching into his coat. He left a folder on her desk. No deadline. Just a request. From someone who's watched you for a long time. He started to leave. Then paused in the doorway. We call you Phoenix, he said, but you've been flying other people out of the fire for years. I just wonder when you'll let someone carry you. The door shut behind him. She didn't open the folder. Not yet. Instead, she folded her hands and stared into the dark beyond the window. She remembered Cutter's face, when he saluted. Not out of fear. Not out of formality. But because something had changed in him. She remembered Lewis's voice. My dad always said. Phoenix gave the rest of him back. She leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. For once, the memories didn't burn. They flickered. And then, briefly, they warmed. The sun rose behind the western ridgeline 2 days later, casting long, sharp shadows across the yard outside the barracks. Most of Camp Granite lay quiet, between rotations, between classes. The wind had softened, and the drill field looked almost peaceful in the early light. Morgan stood at the edge of the gravel, jacket on, boots laced. She held her pack in one hand, a small one, bare essentials. Nothing personal except for a folded letter from Quantico and the faded patch now stitched into the lining of her coat. She hadn't answered the transfer. But she hadn't said no. A transport vehicle idled near the front gate. Not for her. For a group of new recruits just arriving. 18 and 19-year-olds, stepping off with bags too clean and eyes too wide. She watched them for a moment, how they looked around, already calculating, already bracing for what came next. It would be a hard cycle. They always were. One of the new arrivals made the mistake of looking back at her. Just for a second. She didn't smile. But she didn't look away either. That was enough. He turned forward again, his shoulders straighter. Behind her, a familiar voice. Staff Sergeant. She turned. Private Cutter stood there in his dress uniform, duffel over one shoulder. Officially, he had passed out 2 days earlier. His orders had come through, deployment prep in South Carolina, then overseas attachment. He hadn't left. Private, she said. Her voice neutral. He hesitated, then stepped closer. I waited. I thought maybe you'd be at the field. I was. I missed you. You weren't looking hard enough. He nodded, swallowing. I wanted to say goodbye. She didn't answer. I wanted to say thank you, he said, more quietly. Again. You did. He looked down at the gravel, scuffed it with his boot. He looked like someone about to ask for something he hadn't earned. Then, I read about you. She tilted her head, faintly. The reports. I found one of the after-action logs. Hellmand. The night you were hit. That's classified. It was redacted. Mostly. He glanced at her, a trace of nervousness on his face. But I didn't need details. I read what mattered. And I understood. Understood what? Why you came back. Why you teach. She didn't respond. I'm going to do the same, he said. I've already told my CO. After my first tour, I want to apply to the instructor path. Still, she said nothing. Because of you, he added. Because I want to be what you were to me. At that, she met his eyes. I wasn't anything to you, she said. You broke. I didn't save you. He stood straighter. You showed me how to rebuild myself. The words hung there between them. Not dramatic. Not poetic. Just true. After a long pause, she stepped closer. Looked down at the patch on his sleeve, the new unit marking, fresh thread, sharp edges. She tapped it once, lightly. "Don't wear a uniform," she said, "until you've earned the silence behind it." He nodded. She reached into her coat. Pulled out a worn, laminated card, creased at the edges. She held it out. He took it. The card showed coordinates. Old ones. Written in ink that had faded. "What's this?" "The place I landed when I pulled your squad mate's father out of fire. Tell him I still remember the tree line. And the screams." Cutter's fingers closed over the card. "I will." They stood a moment longer. Then she nodded once, and he turned away. At the gate, he looked back. She didn't wave. She never did. But her hand rested over the patch sewn into her coat. Later that day, she sat in her room, the folder from Quantico finally opened. The orders were clean. The letter was signed by a brigadier she had once medevaced under fire. The final paragraph was short. "We remember what you did. And we trust what you will do. It's time, Reilly. We need you on the front lines of healing." She closed the folder. She packed a second bag. Not much more than the first. On her way out, she walked the drill field one more time. Let her hand drift across the wooden edge of the flagpole. It was worn smooth with years. Under her breath, she whispered the names. The ones inked into her arm. The ones she carried when no one else could. Then she stepped out of the gate. No parade. No salute. Just the wind. And a woman walking forward, once more, into the fire. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at Camp Granite. No envelope. Just folded, hand-delivered by a courier no one recognized. The name on the outside was written in clean, steady ink. Staff Sergeant Reilly Morgan. But Morgan was already gone. The letter ended up on the desk of Lieutenant Brody, who opened it after 3 days. Inside were 3 things. A single line of text. A worn ribbon bar, edges scorched. And a photo. The line said, "Phoenix never needed medals." The ribbon was the original from Morgan's uniform, Silver Star. The one she'd refused to wear. The photo showed a young man in fatigues, standing at a base in South Carolina, saluting. Behind him, scrawled in chalk on a board, were 5 names. Underneath, "Remember who taught you to stand." Brody kept the ribbon. Pinned it behind his office door, where only the instructors saw it. He never spoke about it. Didn't need to. Somewhere across the country, in a quiet town where the buses still stopped at the corner and the wind rustled old war memorial flags, Morgan sat on a bench near a lake. A child's laughter echoed in the distance. She held a notebook in one hand. In the other, a patch. Frayed. Still warm from memory. A shadow fell across the bench. She looked up. Private Adam Lewis. Now out of uniform. Plain clothes. Civilian walk. Eyes that had seen too much too soon. "I thought you'd be here," he said. She nodded. Said nothing. He sat beside her. "My father never told me everything," he said. "But he told me this." She turned slightly. He said Phoenix didn't just carry him out. She stayed until the medics came. She sat beside him. Held his hand. She stared across the water. "I did." He said you whispered something to him, Lewis added. "I did." He waited. She said it aloud now, softly. "I told him, you're not alone. You're not done." Lewis reached into his pocket. Pulled out a small, faded tag. A broken dog tag, split at the chain hole. "My father wanted you to have this too." She took it. Closed her fingers around it. Breathed deep. "What was he like?" she asked, eyes still on the lake. Lewis smiled. He lived long enough to laugh again. And he never forgot the woman who showed him how. She didn't speak. But for the first time, her eyes glistened. And for the first time, she let them.